Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. My name is Christina. This is the extended for Leo. So if you haven't watched the first part, go watch that first and come back here. So we're continuing on with the story. We're on like how is it that you can shift your focus, Leo, in this situation. And so we were talking about how the Three of Voices and the Knight of Inspiration, it's like as soon as sort of this blockage is released, you have very quick momentum into this choice point that you're in, right? It's like it's almost like because this is how they came out on my table today, where it's like you have to make the choice to almost like step out away from whatever this frustration is to release it, because to some extent it does feel like there is sort of this period of still sort of being drawn towards that, right? Like with the Ace of Voices that was looking back, it's like you are moving towards it. You've made sort of had sort of the intention to sort of move in this direction, but there's still sort of an energy that is pulling you back, or like you're looking back at it perhaps, or just trying to like understand what it was. It's like you're still even though the flame is out, you're still being drawn in by the shadow of the smoke, right? That kind of thing. It's like, it's almost like the smoke is more material than the flame is. That's interesting. Okay. But you are moving forward very quickly. And here you have this interesting combination of cards, the Chariot and the Ace of Inspiration. This Chariot has come out in almost all of the readings recently, where it's talking about very much like momentum forward, especially with this more of this sort of spotlight energy coming from specifically the solar plexus. So that could be an area of focus for you, Leo, of like really sort of perhaps doing like a lot of like solar plexus meditation or whatever it is, of working with that. Yellow may be a good color for you to wear or interact with in some way. But how I was looking at this is that this spotlight is directly on this Ace of Inspiration, right? It's like whatever it is that you're moving towards, or your goal, it could be like what it is that, like the vision that you have for what it is that you're moving towards, a certain project, your creativity in general. If you don't have like a specific project in mind, it could just be the energy of the Ace of Inspiration, which is like fresh, new, passionate sort of beginning, is kind of how that interaction is happening. And I want to say here because I feel like part of the Three of Voices may be almost like a fear of starting or fear of moving towards it, because of the fact that it may move very quickly, or that because there's also here the Fool, right? Which is such a beautiful, like it came out like this, where it's like you are moving towards whatever this new start is, but there may be sort of that fear of like about to like step off a cliff or that kind of thing, where it's like whatever's behind this sort of step is unknown or uncharted. But I want to bring in these two energies because I feel like you're sort of in this hermit where it's like you can see that new start. You can see the direction that you're supposed to go in. But this part here, as I was saying, like if you're trying to like create or develop a new habit, or leave behind an old habit that's no longer serving you, the first couple days, the first couple of steps are a little bit challenging, where it's like you're having to like sort of navigate a new land, right? It's like perhaps your compass is needing to be realigned, that kind of aspect here. But what you have here is the intuition and growth, right? Like these two cards came out together as being like, how can you shift your focus? Because it's interesting that you have this hunger card, which I often talk about as the solar plexus, but the intuition is your third eye. And so there's an interesting interaction here where it's kind of like almost like using your solar plexus like your gut instinct perhaps, as your intuition, right? Connecting those two things of like your next choices, this next set of choices, is something that you do almost like instinctively or like with your gut instinct, right? It's like there may be, because I feel like for you, it's like you have all the information already. You know what it is that you want or what it is that you're moving towards, but the actual taking the steps or like overthinking about the steps may be tripping you up a little bit. But with the Chariot here, it's almost like allow sort of this energy, the hunger, perhaps the solar plexus energy to move you forward. Like that's sort of the momentum that is wanting to, because there is a lot of energy here, right? It's like you have all of this sort of forward momentum energy, very powerful kind of pace, I want to say, that is going to bring you forward. And it's almost like having to surrender to that. That the fact that this energy will carry you forward. And even if you can't see the next step, like you can't perhaps anticipate what will happen next, your third eye, the inner vision kind of aspect is going to help you to sort of move towards what it is that you want. It's like, it's almost like here, this combination of cards, because I feel like perhaps the fear here, especially because I was being drawn to like the spotlight coming from the feet, right? It's like perhaps you're afraid that if you go too fast, you're gonna trip up in some way, right? Like almost like if you run, you're gonna trip on your feet, kind of thing. But it's like if you keep focused on your goal, like it's almost like if you draw more attention to your feet, or like how like the steps that you're taking, metaphorically, your feet representing your actions, your movements. If you draw more attention to that, it may actually cause you to trip up more. So it's almost like you have to look up and look past any sort of obstacles or distractions. Like don't look at the ground when you're running is kind of what this is talking about. You have to look forward in order to propel you in that direction. Okay, and then here you have these two cards, which is incredible. The Squaring of the Circle and the Philosopher's Stone, which is exactly what I was just talking about, where it's kind of like you don't know what the next steps are. Or it's like with this Ace of Inspiration too, because it feels like rather than like a specific project or goal, it's more so a general energy. And that's what this is talking about. It's like these don't have pictures or forms that we can actually relate to, right? It's like there's no image here that creates anything. It's sort of just like guidelines or like a general framework. It's kind of what this is. And just like a set of rules is kind of what this, or like a concept, right? Like Squaring of the Circle is a concept where you add structure or create structure or put structure onto an idea that is like non-physical, right? It's like having to actually create something physical from something that is just an idea, that kind of thing. So that's what the Ace of Inspiration is talking about. But also with the Philosopher's Stone, it brings in this energy of like the Fool, right? Like of like being at this new sort of creation point where you don't know what the next step is, but at the same time you have all of like that state of being sort of like no baggage, no knowledge, not knowing anything or not knowing where to start is a very, very important sort of state to be in order to create, right? Like you have to be in this state. But because of this Philosopher's Stone, again, Harry Potter was a huge part of my childhood, so I'm gonna just bring in the message from the Philosopher's Stone of when he was trying to get the Philosopher's Stone in the climax, right? So Voldemort, the antagonist of the story, was trying to get the Philosopher's Stone because it had the potential to give him everlasting life. At this point, Voldemort was a non-physical being. He didn't exist. He didn't have his own body. And he was trying to create that for himself, right? So he wanted the stone. He was at this mirror, and knowing that the mirror would reveal the trick or the last sort of step to sort of getting that stone. But because Voldemort was who he is, he was unable to cross that barrier. He could not get the stone for himself. And for Harry, even though he was like an 11-year-old kid, didn't know anything about magic, didn't know anything about anything at that point, he was able to get the stone from the mirror because he had innocence almost, right? It's like he had no intention of using this stone for his own purposes. He just wanted to sort of, what did he want at that point? He had a more pure intention is kind of what this was talking about. He had he didn't know what he would do with the stone. He didn't have any sort of like, it was almost like being free of desire, but it's like he did have a desire for like that mirror, the mirror of Erised, the mirror of desire. It reflects back to you what your heart desires the most, right? And I feel like you were at that point, Leo, of like being in this state of having such a pure intention of what it is your heart desires the most, that it allows you to achieve the thing that you want most, right? Or like achieve something that you perhaps don't even know the full value of it, of what it is that you are receiving, because your intention is so pure on what it is that you desire, if that makes sense. And it's not even about like, because I feel like this energy of like the reflection and the partnership here, because it's so interesting. It's like I'm always the type of person, because I read so many stories, or like I used to read a lot of fantasy novels and things like that, is like in stories and in storytelling, the antagonist of the story is always a reflection of the protagonist, right? Two individuals who have so much in common, but somehow end up on different paths, right? But that's how both of them learn. And I'm not calling anyone an antagonist here, because in real life, there's no such thing as that kind of like pure black and white kind of thinking, or like this person's good, this person's bad. There's not any of that. But what's being focused on and highlighted here is that the two of you may have had this encounter with somebody where there were so many similarities between the two of you, but somehow you're now on different paths because of this desire. I want to say for you, Leo, it seems to me that in this reading, of course it could be flipped and reversed. There's always that sort of dynamic, especially when we're talking about mirrors and reflection. All of that is here. But it's for you, Leo, it's like you're the one with the Philosopher's Stone. You have the Philosopher's Stone in your pocket because you have no intention of using it, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. You have the thing that is desired because your intention is towards it is pure. You don't have intentions in using it to whatever, give yourself everlasting life, is kind of how this is coming through. I have no idea if that makes sense. Hopefully there was something in there for you. But anyways, we're moving on to an area of growth for you, Leo. We have here the abundance and the space card and flow. So I feel like what this is talking about is like focusing on your abundance, or like your work, or even just like the physical resources that you have around you is going to help in sort of creating space and distance from whatever this thing is that you're leaving behind, right? And with this flow energy, it just talks about well, I've been thinking a lot about how our bodies discard waste, right? Like things that we don't need, or toxins, or things that our body just no longer uses. All of that sort of process is automatic. We don't have conscious control over the things that, like, how our body discards waste, right? Like when you go to the bathroom, you don't have to think about, okay, I'm keeping all the water, I'm keeping all of the nutrients, and I'm discarding, like, you don't have to consciously think about that, is what this combination of cards is talking about, is that if you just allow sort of, or surrender to the flow of it, the waste energy is just going to be discarded on its own. There's no sort of like conscious intention setting of like, I'm going to get rid of anything. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm just going to leave it there. Okay. And then here you have the 9 and 10 of materials, which is talking about, because the 9 of materials is a very independent sort of energy. The 10 of materials, this one specifically, I talk about as being like having to detach from whatever this like collective group is, because there's an energy there that may be draining or just not for you, right? So what this is, because these two cards are talking or coming out together, is, and they were directly under here like this, right? It's like focusing on your abundance and perhaps taking some space away from whatever this 10 of materials is representing for you. I always talk about the 10 of materials as being just like your whatever's in your surroundings currently, whether or not they are actually, it's actually sort of a long-term thing that you view. It's like whatever is manifested already in your environment. And then here, the next card with the flow energy coming out, because I see this 9 of materials as also being like a vortex, right? As being like pulling in or attracting the energies of the things that you want. And what's interesting here is that she's got like this rose in her solar plexus, right? It's all of this sort of solar plexus, willpower, your identity, your ability to be sort of independent, but also it's like all of this like creational energy for you today, the ability to create or having a belief that you can create. It's all of this sort of like positive mindset kind of energy. I feel like doing that is going to bring in, well, it's two things. I feel like it's going to bring in something for you. With the Knight of Voices, I see as being sort of like an arrival of perhaps news or like a blessing or just information or like epiphany or whatever it is. But it's also this energy because it's the finish line, right? It's like you're at the finish line, but you're going to be at a point, or just like, because this is the area of growth, wanting to sort of shift between like no longer looking back at the things that you're leaving behind and actually going forward and going towards what it is that you want. Okay, and then here you have the 9 of Inspiration, which again is all of this independent sort of standing alone kind of energy. This may be you after you've crossed that finish line, right? It's like realizing your power or your strength, that kind of thing. But I feel like it's also something new as well, right? It's like once you sort of acclimatize to this sort of the beginning stages, which may feel like very quick and fast. And then here it's like having like stability within that energy, right? Because it's still the desert, but I'm just like drawn towards like this like sort of jagged path behind her. It's kind of like realizing that you've made it to a certain point. There may be that sort of perspective as well, because you have here, where should I go next? I think I want to talk about the Strength card, because I feel like these two are going together today. The Strength card I've been talking about as a new, like a set of rules or expectations, and today it's coming through a bit differently than it has been, where it was like you were having in the previous readings, it was having to leave behind a certain set of rules or expectations of a given situation. But now it's almost like that's what's coming in. It's a new set of rules or expectations or ideas or concepts that you can play with and explore and learn about is kind of how this is coming through. But it feels like it's like having to do with your independence and strength. But I feel like it's something that you've already done before because it's the 9 of inspiration, right? It's like that's a completion point. Or perhaps it's talking about that when you are in this new, like after you've crossed the finish line, it's almost like you've done this before, or that it's going to feel like you've been doing this for a while, even if it's new. That kind of thing, where it's like you already have a lot of strength, or you already have a lot of power or independence. And so this aspect of moving into something new is almost not going to feel new because it's something that you have done before, in a sense of like, you know how to adapt to your environment, or you know how to find strength in newness or independence or that kind of thing. And I feel like it's actually going to be quite fun with the page of inspiration. So this is the new set of these two cards go together as well, where it's like you're receiving a new inspiration or a new idea, new things to play with, new sort of activities or hobbies perhaps even, but it feels like fun, right? It's like there's this aspect where it's like you know how to do this, right? You've been in this position before, perhaps, even if it's not exactly the same. It's like you know how to adapt to your environment in a way that it's going to actually just feel fun very quickly, even if it's new, even if it's a bit scary, even if it's like foreign to you. It is going to be fun because you do have like, it's like if you start playing a new video game, right? It's like, not that I play video games, but I imagine that the actual task of playing the video game, of starting a new game, is exciting. There is sort of new rules and new landscapes to sort of explore, but it is just fun, is kind of how this feels. And then this interesting combination, well, I'm just going to go here, the Transcendence card, which talks about expansion, right? It's like, I want to say also exploring other aspects of yourself, or seeing how far you have grown, right? It's like, I feel like there will also be a moment of like, when you're in this new space, you can sort of look back at the situation that you left, but not in sort of a phantom pain kind of energy, but it'll be more so of like an understanding or an acceptance, or more of like a satisfaction, because you do have here the 4 of emotions and the Muse of emotions, which is this, like the 4 of emotions to me is looking like this is perhaps the newness, where it's like you're not sure what to do, but very quickly moving into this Muse energy, which is this, right? Which is this sort of like connection, perhaps. There's perhaps a new connection, or just like feeling that it's the removal of that phantom pain is kind of how this is feeling. It's like this is sort of the phantom pain energy, and then moving into the Muse of emotions, which to me the Muses in this deck is always like a challenge, an emotional challenge. So leaving behind sort of the Queen of emotions, which can be sort of heaviness or sadness perhaps, into sort of like you've accomplished that, or you've moved past it, you've gained some sort of knowledge or transcendence about that perhaps. I feel like that may be an area of growth. I do think that will take time, and also focusing on the new thing that you are going towards. Okay, Leo, I'm going to end it with the Moonology card. So the first one to come out was, what do you need to release? I think you know already. Not only is it releasing, but you're also welcoming in or expanding towards the things that you want to bring in, right? There's always both. If you release something, there's space now to be filled, and that is going to be filled with the new. And then it's a time to give rather than take, the new moon in Virgo. You actually had this card upside down. It was in between these two cards in the reverse, right? And it says it's time to release negativity. And that's what's interesting here is I feel like there's not a lot of negativity. It's like you had to release something that was perhaps had benefits, but in the end it was perhaps blocking these two aspects, right? So it's like you had to release something that wasn't negative, but had negative consequences, if that makes sense. Okay, and then here is that you have you and your loved ones are safe, the new moon in Cancer, and prosperity lies ahead, the new moon in Taurus, which I love to see. For you, Leo, I'm going to end it there. I do have other videos if you're interested in checking those out. Thanks so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.